Welcome to another episode of USATF Journey to Gold Zone podcast. I'm your host, Wallace Spearman Jr., two-time Olympian, and I have two guests I'd love to introduce, Dr. Ken Clark and Dr. Adam Petway. Welcome to the show, fellas. I appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Wallace. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's great seeing you guys. Look forward to this.
Yeah, appreciate it, Wallace. This will be fun.
All right, and we'll jump straight into it. So I've had a chance to work with both of you all uh, in different capacities. Adam, you were actually my strength coach back in the day, and you have definitely elevated yourself and your skill set to heights I never thought you would achieve, but I'm proud of you. And Dr. Ken Clark, you work with a lot of our elite athletes on a day-to-day basis and weekly basis. We'll get into that a bit more as we get started.
Awesome.
Sounds great.
All right, well let's hop right into it. So first, Dr. Ken Clark, just give us a general idea of what you do on a day-to-day basis and how you are actually integrated with the success of Team USA Track and Field.
Yeah, absolutely. So first had a chance to join up with USATF in approximately 2017. I joined the sports science team. My full-time job is I'm a faculty member in biomechanics at Westchester University, right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And right now, currently, we're getting video data on all of our elite sprinters and hurdlers, and that video and data gets sent to me largely through Tyler Noble, and then me and my team at Westchester, we analyze it and we provide feedback to the coaches and the athletes so that they get pretty high frequency touches, so to speak, as far as getting feedback on their sprint performance, their hurdle performance, both in practice and in competitions. So for me, it's been really nice because I get to work with the coaches, get to work with the athletes, get to work with the incredible team at USA Track and Field, and really also get some of my students involved with analyzing the data. And so it's kind of a good learning. It's great, kind of real world learning for them. And I think we provide really helpful feedback to the coaches and athletes that certainly has helped them prepare both for kind of international competitions, the Olympics, that sort of thing.
And you as well, Dr. Petway.
Yeah, so currently my role is Director of Biomechanics and Assistant Clinical Professor at the University of Louisville. My background, like you mentioned, is diverse. I credit you for a lot of exposure to speed power, and then introducing me to a lot of really great speed power coaches and biomechanists. So you were integral in my development. But I've worked at every level of sport, from starting out at high school as a head strength and conditioning coach and ninth grade boys basketball coach, all the way to the NBA, everywhere in between. So I've been very fortunate to just be around good people that are like-minded and growth-minded. So I'm really loving my new position, though. It's a kind of a dual role where I get to interface with athletics on, the biomechanics side and the sports science side, but I also, teach and mentor undergraduate and graduate students. So it's, I kind of get the best of both worlds.
And I should probably dive in here and tell how Adam and I met because it's a funny
Yeah.
small world here. So I got my master's degree in kinesiology at Westchester. I finished that up in 2010, and then I did my PhD from 2010 to 2015 in the SMU Locomotor Lab. And then I came back to the Philadelphia area, and my former mentor, my former coaching mentor, was essentially the director of performance training for the Philadelphia 76ers, a guy named Jesse Wright, who's an incredible coach and mentor. And then Jesse and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jesse connected me and Adam,
Yeah.
and I was coming out to the 76ers, and we were
Yeah.
talking shop. And then just so happened that we also had this mutual interest in track and field. And of course, Wallace, when I got involved with USA Track and Field and started connecting with you, then it kind of just all connected the dots, so to speak, between the three of us. So and then Adam actually came out to Westchester for a year and was working with our track athletes for 1 year. It unfortunately was the year where my first daughter was born, so I didn't have a ton of time available. But yeah, it's been great, kind of closing that loop, and always kind of getting to talk both sports performance and sports science, and kind of always bringing that back to track and field as well.
Absolutely, small world. I'm about to say, you never know what life has in store for you. I would have never thought that Adam would have switched from a basketball coach, professional basketball coach, now a professional track and field coach, and yet here we are. So, I just want to ask a few questions. First and foremost, you hear the word biomechanics thrown around in track and field, and to me, it can mean one thing, but to you, who actually specialize in that field, just give me an idea of what is it, how is it applied, and how can it improve performance?
From a from a biomechanics like on the track standpoint, some of the things that we're typically looking at with like our elite sprinters and hurdlers are some of the basics like velocity, acceleration, stride rate, stride length, forces that are being put into the ground, where their limbs are in space. In other words, their technique and where their legs are, where their trunk is, both during the acceleration phase, the top speed phase, for hurdlers when they're going over the hurdle, that sort of thing. So we're looking at, to use kind of nerdy biomechanics words, we're looking at kinetics, so the motion and the forces, and during different segments of the race. And we typically will, film the athletes, do our analysis, and then provide that feedback to the coaches and the athletes. And really, it all comes back to figuring out if there's areas that they can improve. As we all know on this podcast, the differences between gold medal and not even making the final are extremely slim. So, I mean, things are so competitive at the elite level in this day and age that even several hundredths of a second in a short sprint like the 100 meters or the 200 meters is a big difference between making the final, potentially making the podium, and not. And so we're really looking for even minor things in a practice or in a competition leading up to a big global competition or national competition where we can give feedback to the athlete and the coach and say, hey, you're looking pretty good overall, but maybe your limb position at touchdown isn't quite where it needs to be. Or maybe there's force production that's not quite as high as it needs to be. And we can, address that with the coach and the athlete and maybe the sports medicine team and just, gain that extra, 0.5% that's going to raise them from maybe making it to the semifinals to maybe making it to the podium. So that's really our big goal on the biomechanics side of things. Clearly, that integrates with applied biomechanics and speed, strength, and conditioning that Adam has a ton of experience with, both in his background at Arkansas and also at the professional level. So Adam, I'll kick it from kind of what we've been doing on the track with USATF to kind of what you're doing now and what you've done in the past as well.
Yeah, I think it's such an exciting time in the field of biomechanics because it's a growing field. Such admiration for the work you've done over the years with USA Track and Field, and all the great work coming out of Westchester and SMU's lab. But I think it's a lot of the origins of this are in athletics or in track and field, just because you know um, the start and the finish are kind of a fixed location in the 100 meters, or hey, you're gonna accelerate up to the board, and there's the penultimate step, pre-penultimate takeoff. So you're looking at all the limb velocities and, like you said, the kinetics and kinematics behind that fixed location. What really excites me is kind of taking that application that's going on and has been going on for a number of years in track and field and applying it to a team sport setting. We're doing a lot of work with like baseball, and I think they're kind of like the next frontier in team sports as it relates to applied biomechanics. Again, the X and Y coordinates of pitching and hitting are from a fixed location. There's not occlusion in the camera systems that you can use. So there's a lot of really good research opportunities in baseball, but even court sports like basketball. I mean, there's a new clause in the CBA coming out in the NBA in 25-26 where there's quarterly biomechanics assessments for all 30 teams. I think you're starting to see more technologies with camera systems and computer vision that are going to capture some of those biomechanical data points to help gain insight on what are the athletes doing in competition, because ultimately the goal of applied biomechanics is to increase performance and decrease the risk of potential injury, right? So if we can use all of this data in training and in competition, it kind of takes it out of a lab setting and into a field setting. And that's what's really exciting about the current state of applied biomechanics. So it's a really fun field to be in, and I only see its growth being exponential in the coming years.
Absolutely, I agree. So, based off the information that you both just provided, I'll ask: is introducing this information to athletes at a younger age more impactful? Do you see more benefits behind that? Is there fear that someone might achieve some athletic performances that may put them in harm's way if they aren't taking care of their body? Or, you know, what are the pros and cons of this to someone receiving this information at a younger age?
Yeah, great follow up question. I think largely it's going to be beneficial because with more technology, as Adam alluded to, more information and more useful data. I think that raises the ceiling just overall as to the level of performance. So I do think that kind of from a 10,000 foot view, it's a good thing. I will say though that as we all know, athletes have different learning styles, and so for some athletes, I think it could be a very good thing. Information provided on their performance and potentially ways that they could improve even from a relatively younger age. There may be some athletes that either at a young age or even at an older age, potentially don't process more information better, so to speak. And so then it becomes the role of the sports scientist, the biomechanist, and the coach to kind of package that information in a way that ends up being beneficial to the specific athlete's learning style. So I do think that, just to summarize overall, it's definitely a good thing. But I think it needs to be delivered to the athlete, regardless of age, in a way that they can, understand it to improve their performance. And before I just toss it back to Adam, one thing I wanted to build on his last answer was the amount of technology and the rate at which technology is developing is really incredible right now. From camera systems and NBA arenas to our own markerless motion capture system that we're using with USA Track and Field, and I won't provide too many more details than that. But I mean, it is allowing for things that were not thought to be possible or were not possible even a decade ago. So yeah, really things are taking off kind of at an exponential rate as far as what the technology can provide us with.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that a bit more
Yeah.
in a bit, if that's all right. So, Adam, but prior to that, do you have any comments about the age,
Yeah,
introducing this to a young age?
Dr. Clark made a good point is just differential learning and styles of how you retain information. That's going to be a huge degree of variance based on, the type of athlete you're dealing with, where they come from, what sport they play. So I do think, when you look at youth athletics, I mean, particularly in the sport I came from in basketball, I mean, those kids play 13 months out of the year. It's crazy the amount of volume and the repetition that they're getting. And a lot of times they're not developing the proper um, robustness from a general standpoint to withstand that amount of frequency of competition, right? So I think we do kind of need to step back and take a 10,000 foot view of what's going on in youth athletics. But I do think here locally we have community outreach, and we're trying to set up some partnerships with local high schools just to provide just some baseline assessments to say, hey, you might want to work on this with this particular athlete just based on how they're presenting, and something simple as like a drop jump or a counter movement jump or a change of direction task. So I do think that's important. But yeah, to Dr. Clark's point, you know, um, young athletes receive information differently than older athletes just based on experience. So how that's communicated is really important. But I do think youth athletics, particularly like you're looking at sports like baseball, basketball, these travel sports, I mean, they compete at a high rate of frequency. So if their mechanics aren't proper and they're not kind of built to handle that frequency of competition, um, you know, once they get to college or once they get to the professional level, all that accumulation of training, in an aberrant way may affect them later in their career. So I do think, having more of an upstream intervention for, movement competency is really, really important, and something that, here locally, we're definitely trying to attack.
So, one challenge I actually wanted to highlight as well, and I wanted both you all to comment on is, you can have this information, you can have a wealth of information, and the athletes could be looking for it, but sometimes you'll face hurdles, you know, within the support system. So whether it be, coaching or with their medical staff or lack thereof. So just some challenges. What challenges have you all, overcome or seen in your development of your skill set?
I'll start with the coaching aspect. Coaches are PhDs within their sport, and they may not articulate things like Ken or I would, but they definitely know what they're looking for, and maybe have an idea. I think it's our jobs to maybe provide solutions. So there may be some friction internally with, again, I guess this goes back to the communication and kind of how you present the data. Some coaches that I've worked for, they want to see everything. They want to know X cells, D cells, total distance, what's going on from a training load perspective. Hey, how does that compare to the match play demands? So I've worked for coaches that are really dialed in with the data, and then I've worked with coaches that are, hey, just tell me how long we went, or hey, I just want to know just like the most low hanging fruit or the baseline. So it really again goes back to coaches have learning styles too, right? Similar to youth athletes. So I think it's really in the job of the biomechanist or the sports scientist to deliver it in a way that's palatable to that coach, right? But ultimately, again, the athlete is always the most important thing, and that should be the most forward facing thing. So they want to see increases in performance, and they want their athletes to be available. So decrease in the potential risk of injury. So if you can present the information in a way that they can understand that, I think that kind of makes those barriers or those hurdles you mentioned um, a lot lower.
So, what are some things that you're seeing right now? Are there trends you're seeing amongst our athletes? Are there, I'd like to see trends. I'd like to hear about some technology. If you all have favorite pieces of equipment that you like to use, and you know, what do you anticipate seeing in these next few years, especially going into LA across the board? So whether it be in team sports or in track and field.
Yeah, definitely.
And we'll start with you,
So
Doctor
Yep.
King. Yep.
So we've with USA Track and Field developed several new video capture technologies over the last couple of years that we're starting to implement. One in particular on the sprints and hurdles side of things, and without again getting into too many details, but it essentially allows us to set up just camera on the side of the track and get two-dimensional or even three-dimensional kinematics, i.e., position of the limbs in space as the sprinter completes the sprint and as the hurdler completes you know, um, the trial over the hurdles, and so it's really allowing us to get data that we weren't able to get necessarily in the past from just setting up a GoPro or an iPad on the side of on the side of the track and get all of this incredible data. And the power in that is that it allows us to again take that data, analyze it, take that video and analyze it, and give feedback to the coaches as to how well the athlete is doing in practice and where they stack up relative to what it takes to make podium at national championships in an Olympic competition. One of the other things that we've really kind of honed in on over the last 2 years is because we've gathered data both on the track, like Tyler Noble does an incredible job of going on the track and collecting data, and I'll be doing a little bit more of that moving forward as well. And then also with this remote data capture, we've gotten a lot more data than we have in the past. So from some of our elite training groups, we've gotten data, every week or every other week over the course of the entire season. And those trends have allowed us to really kind of narrow in on not just like what does it take to, do okay, but really what does it take to make the Olympic team? What does it take to medal at the Olympics? And so we've really been able to then give that feedback to the coaches and say, hey, if you really want your athlete to be competitive on the global level, this is what it takes in practice. And that, that level of resolution, that level of precision in knowing where their athletes needs to be, again, is really informative and really powerful. In particular, over the last couple years, we've looked at, top speed sprinting, of course, hurdle over one hurdle, in between hurdles, that sort of thing. We've really also dialed in on the start, not just the first couple of meters, but the start out to 10 meters. And now this year, our upcoming goal is to look at kind of transitional acceleration because we think that there's a lot of information there that we can really hone in on. And we've gotten to the point where we can look at an athlete's start to 10 meters for like a short sprinter, for example, a start to 10 meters and a top speed fly, and basically say, okay, this athlete's, going to be in a position where they're going to be competitive on a global level. And I'll finish with this one story. And again, without kind of naming names or giving away too much information, but we had data, for a certain marquee event where we had athletes their practice data right before the competition started, and we had some internal conversations with the USATF sports science team. We're like, okay, these couple of athletes, they're ready to medal. Like we know that this is gonna, just from the practice data, we knew exactly how well that they were gonna do. So I think the technology, the higher frequency of capturing the data and then tracking the data over time over the last couple of years has really provided us with more insight as to what it takes in practice to really perform at an elite level in competition.
Dr. Petway.
Yeah, no, I think this is kind of where my perspective has maybe changed over the last couple of years. And, again, this is why I have such an affinity for track and field because you just can use technology during the competitions to say, hey, if we hit this peak velocity during our approach, this is probably going to be the estimated jump distance as long as you can convert on the board, right? Or, hey, if you're at, this rate of acceleration at the 10, 20, 30 meter mark, this will probably be your time in the 100 meters, right? So you just kind of take segments of your race or your event and just kind of break it down. I think we need to start shifting our perspective from that, track and field model into team sports, right? So I think, assessing what they're doing in the competition and kind of breaking it down. And again, there's tons of technologies out there as far as, camera systems during training and competition. There's, LPS that you could, track, accelerations, decelerations, distance, speed in training and competition for team sports. But I do think there needs to be kind of a shift from a very, controlled environment where, it's like, hey, lab based, marker based motion capture, embedded force plates to kind of shifting and getting similar information as far as, ground reaction forces, limb velocities, all the kinematic data that they're, exposed to in training and in competition, right? We did a pilot study in NCAA basketball this fall, just looking at deceleration qualities, just using motorized resistance device. So just using 1080, looking at 5 and 10 meter decels, 505 change of direction. And we want to start looking at just globally, how do athletes accelerate, decelerate, change direction in team sport? And is that any implication on performance, right? Because, like, in a controlled environment, these athletes in team sport may perform the task very well, but there may be some sort of cognitive gap or skill gap that prevents them performing at a high level during competition. So I think taking, that track and field model and what you guys do so brilliantly and applying it in a team sport setting is kind of the trend I see from a technological advancement standpoint, in team sports like basketball, in baseball. Like I mentioned, now, in most Major League Baseball stadiums, there's, markerless motion capture cameras to capture, limb velocity and inverse dynamics, ground reaction forces from pitching and hitting, right? So why can't we do that in sports like football or basketball? There's some logistical issues as far as occlusion of the cameras and congestion. But I think that's where this thing is headed, and it's really an exciting time. But yeah, the technological advances have been exponential. I mean, I think, we're not too far away from having a fairly comprehensive biomechanics lab just on your iPhone at 240 hertz, right? So it's an exciting time. But I do think team sports need to adopt the track and field model where it's like, okay, in the lab, their asymmetries were this, or their knee extension velocity was that. But then when they get out on the court, their outputs are going to be completely different just based on the technical and tactical components of the competitions and the training, right? So I think that's where we need to shift our focus to from an evaluation standpoint in team sports. So again, I have such admiration for the work that Dr. Clark does and everything that USA Track and Field is doing. And I think we can apply that same model to team sports.
And one thing I do want to comment on before we kind of shift into the discussion of technology, I'll tell a quick story. Dr. Clark, I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but as Adam and I were working together, we call him Big A at Arkansas during those days, he throws this, what is it, HRV monitor on me as I run a 4x4. And I don't know if you remember that, but
Bioharness. Yeah, it was a Zephyr
like,
bioharness. Yeah. So it was a accelerometry with gyroscope, but it also had heart rate. So you could get internal and external measures. Yeah.
do you remember what my heart rate was during that 4x4?
Oh God. I not off the top of my head. What was it?
210.
Yeah.
It was like 220, but literally before the race, it was almost just
Yeah.
as high from pure nervousness.
Yeah.
I do not like 400s, man. I
Yeah.
do not.
No, I
But
remember that competition. Yeah.
so
You
we had
performed
that.
you performed pretty well though, from what I
Yeah, it
remember.
was like
Yeah.
a 46 low split. It was early
Yeah.
spring, so that was pretty good. So we
Ki-
had that, and then we
Yeah.
had the force plates that we actually used
Sure.
as well for
Yeah.
preparation. I saw you do some of that, the testing with the basketball players as well. But I think that's a good transition into some of the technology. What are you all excited about? Like, what's on your wish
Yeah.
list? What's coming out? What are you
Well,
currently using? And you can comment on the story too if you like,
Yeah,
Big A.
I'll tell another story that really changed my perspective on everything because we had all that stuff. We remember we had the Tendo units, we had the force
Okay.
plates, we had everything. Um, so in winter of 2015, like we were like, man, I got to figure this thing out. So I was like, oh man, who can I reach out to? Because my experience at that point was just in basketball. You were the first, true high level speed power athlete I had the opportunity to work with. Um, so we reached out, and Coach Boo Snecksnyder's name kept coming up as far as like, hey, he's an elite speed power coach. He'll kind of give you some guidance. So we brought him to campus in 2015, and I had all this data, force plate data, Tendo units. And I was like really going to impress Coach Boo. It's like, hey, we're objective and we use the data to dictate programming. And, I set him down. I remember it was in the office. I don't think you were in the office at this point, but I was showing them we had multiple years of velocity based training and we did counter movement jumps and drop jumps from various heights. And this is how we made interventions based on the data. And he was looking at it and he was like, okay, cool. And he was like, what's his setup in the blocks? I was like, I don't know. He was like, well, what's his flight to contact time during his drive phase? I don't know. What's his pelvic position in the last 20 meters and how's his speed endurance? I was like, well, I don't know. He was like, well, you better get on the track and figure that stuff out. And that will help dictate your like general physical preparation. So that really kind of shifted my perspective on like, wow, I really need to understand what Wallace is doing in a 200-meter race and the phases of that race to kind of reverse engineer what we can do from a general perspective to help his performance, right? So that kind of shifted my perspective. And I started looking even things differently in basketball at that point because it's like, man, I really need to watch what the athletes are doing in their competition. And that should kind of dictate, my general physical preparation, not the other way around. Right. So that was seminal in my development. And, it's something that's always stuck with me over the years.
Yeah, I mean, on the track, we've certainly talked about some of it already as it relates to kind of the video capture. With the kinetics, the forces. What's been really neat about kind of algorithmic development over the last 10 years, i.e., kind of taking our findings in the lab and then being able to translate them to the track, is actually we have ways of just looking at how fast an athlete's running and or how long their foot is on the ground versus how long they're in the air, i.e., contact and flight times, to put it simply. And actually, we know how much force they're applying to the ground, vertical force, or how fast they're applying that force. We know from their rate of acceleration how much horizontal force they're applying. So I think from that perspective, the technology that I'm really excited about is saying, hey, we can get a lot of these metrics without using a force plate in a lab, as Adam is exactly alluding to, and saying, hey, just from our data on the track, we can get some of these kinetic based proxies for force application and how stiff the athlete is upon ground contact, that sort of thing. From another piece of technology or instrumentation that is going to be introduced more heavily, I think there's going to be a lot more usage of uh, uh, electric overspeed and slash resisted devices like the 1080 Sprint, motorized resistance, I should say, 1080 Sprint or Dynaspeed, and certainly some of our elite training groups are using that already. Those devices, such as a 1080 or a Dynaspeed, are being used in many different sports. Again, as Adam alluded to, not just track and field, but certainly a lot of the team sports as well. But I think that's one thing that's going to be really exciting to see how that plays out in track and field over the next quadrennial. And resisted sprinting has been done forever, of course, through various modes. These devices really allow it to really dial in on exactly how much resistance you're providing, how much you're providing over the course of a sprint. And then the always the final frontier is assisted sprinting and overspeed and that sort of thing. And so they allow a very precise way of dialing in overspeed or assisted sprinting. So from a technology standpoint, I think looking at how motorized resistance and assistance get implemented over the next quadrennial is going to be really interesting in track and field, and could be kind of a key to breaking some barriers. So that's probably the next piece of technology that I'm really intrigued about as well.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And once again, quick story, which will lead us into our next topic. So, Big A, back in Arkansas days, Dr. Clark, you're learning a lot about us right
I know
now.
I'm
I
hearing all
promise
the
you.
background.
I have some stories for you too, and I'm about to say yours is coming next. But one day, you know, this I got introduced to sports science, biomechanics from Dr. Petway. Didn't know he could play basketball. Went and took him to a court. A group of my friends were all playing. He didn't get picked up. He called next. He had to wait like 6 games. I'm exaggerating slightly, but by the end of the day, he literally, my family and my friends kicked me off the team so they could have him. So to your point, I was faster than him. I could jump higher than he could,
Skill,
but
man.
there was a skill set exactly that could not be applied. And I
You
remember
know,
you saying how much you loved like track and field because, I can increase X and it's always going to equal, Y or Z. So,
yeah.
I mean, go ahead.
Everywhere I get, I don't know if this is good or bad, but everywhere I go and play pickup, like I always get the same thing. You're not as bad as we thought you were going to be. So I don't know if that's like, but but yeah, no, that was a fun Sunday pickup for sure.
And I acquired a nickname over the years between us as we played horse. Do you remember with Coach Z?
What was it? I
So there were three of us, the two
yeah.
basketball coaches and myself, and I would go in there and I would shoot every single day, forget track practice, and we'd play horse. And everyone wanted to go after me. They called me the buff.
Oh yeah, the buffer, Coach
Because if you
Zimmerman.
went after me,
Yeah.
you were going to last quite a bit longer. And I was about to say, all right, we'll skip past that. But with Dr. King Clark, so we were at an Olympic training camp in Prairie View, and he needed a model. He needed someone to go out there and kind of run through the cameras on. Do you remember this?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they decided to grab the retired aspiring coach at the time to come out. And so literally you can apply, you know, these metrics to anybody, any age, I would imagine. And so one thing I'm actually really proud of, and I've seen this happen over the course of the years, you are able to provide information at a much quicker rate than what you previously could. I mean, how long do you think it's taken you all to get information back to athletes and coaches?
Yeah, we're getting our turnaround time. I mean, there's certainly some feedback we can provide right away, but then our reports are getting turned around within 48 hours. And again, this is happening on a biweekly basis or a weekly basis for the coaches who want to send in video or when we're capturing video like that. So I think in a best case scenario, especially given the new technologies, we're able to give essentially instant feedback to coaches on how their athletes are doing. Doing on a regular basis in their training, and that's it's so informative, and I think that can potentially catch red flags if they're popping up with the athletes, whereas maybe they would not have known that before. And I think it can also again provide feedback to the athletes and coaches as to where they are from a peaking for performance standpoint. Going back to Wallace's story though, yeah, we had to encourage you to run fast enough to be accurate for our model though. I mean, 4 meters a second wasn't going to cut it. I could do
Can't beat
that.
the
We
model.
need we needed close to 10 meters a second. So with a little bit of encouragement, Wallace, really geared it up and was looking good. And we made sure that the system was working and tracking accurately. It was also about 106 degrees those days, so that didn't help
Absolutely.
matters.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, speaking of that, so can any of this information be used for, or is it currently being used by college coaches as a recruiting tool? Are people, asking you questions about this? Are you seeing different trends with different body types? Someone short versus tall, and then can some of this be used to project maybe the future of track and field? Like, is there a body type that could break Usain Bolt's world record or Flojo's world record in the sprints?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. College sports is changing rapidly. Obviously, with the new revenue sharing deal that's going to hit July 1st of 25, NIL transfer portal. Internally, we've actually done some baseline screening on recruits and potential prospects, just to kind of filter out, hey, just like how is this kid moving, and do they fit a model of what a power forward quarterback or power forward point guard look like. So I do think as an assessment tool, it can be very very beneficial. One thing again, I think this goes back to how the data is communicated. It's obviously a sensitive thing because in a controlled environment, an athlete may move a certain way, or present in a certain way that they necessarily don't on the field or the court or during competition. So I do think we're moving towards a model where we are kind of baseline screening, athletes, as they come in, or prospective athletes potentially. when they're on campus. But I do think we're not quite there yet as it relates to okay, just based on these 5 metrics, this kid's going to be an All American, or hey, we've red flagged this kid and it's a potential risk. I don't think it's there quite yet, but we are certainly doing baseline screening and trying to aggregate, a lot of data to look at performance just based on anthropometrics and body type, and just based on different types of force signatures in our assessment, and then just seeing where that kind of data leads us. We're not there yet, but I think in the coming years, that is definitely something that we kind of want to use as just a baseline assessment tool for sure.
It seemed like a lot of people were putting, numbers behind Vic Wembanyama before he actually entered the league.
Mhm.
Did you hear anyone talking about this, or why did they project him to be so successful? It seems like he's living up to the hype, but
Well, he's 7'8" with an 8-foot wingspan. So if you look at all the data that you can gather from the NBA Combine, the biggest predictor of future success isn't jump height or ability to change direction. It's just limb length relative to height. So if you have long arms relative to how tall you are, I mean, that's not something you can coach or teach, but that's definitely a potential factor for success in the league, right? So he's just freakishly tall and skilled. So it's like really that's like a one off. So you could put any number you want behind that, but that plus minus ratio of wingspan to height and the fact he's 7'8" and can run like a deer and shoot the three pretty good is probably the biggest determining factor in his future success. So I don't
him
think,
versus Bobo.
yeah. So different skill set, different upbringing, and different type of player as far as their mentality, right?
Absolutely.
So again, that's the one off. But I mean, if you're 7'8" with like an 8-foot wingspan, you're probably going to be good at basketball. I would say.
My coach told me
I
to
don't
choose
think.
my parents wisely, so I think
Yeah.
I understand. And back to the second part of that question.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah,
you,
well,
predicting records and performance with
great
track.
great transition from
Yeah.
Adam there, because you can talk literally about the same thing when you look at kind of leg length to height ratios. And certainly when you look at the world's fastest humans, either male or female, you can see that the ranges of height are from relatively shorter athletes to relatively taller athletes. I mean, you see that on both sides of the track, male and female. But you look at Bolt, obviously really long legs. We've seen fast athletes on the men's side of things for 5'8" or 5'9", but if I had to guess, the person who's going to, break Bolt's record is going to be relatively taller and going to have long legs. And I think the reason is this: relatively longer legs is such an advantage for everything essentially past 10 or 20 meters, not just because of stride length per se, but it allows you to be on the ground for a longer period of time, have longer contact times to apply force. So that actually, is not just going to reduce the number of strides it takes, but it's going to reduce potentially fatigue down the track, and so it's going to be an advantage for the 100 and the 200. So I think when we look for like the next great sprinter, I'd be interested to see. If I was a gambling person, I'd say 5-10 years down the road, it's going to be somebody who's maybe 6'1" or taller with relatively longer legs. And again, that's not to say that shorter athletes can't be fast. We certainly see shorter athletes are fast, in the present time, in a lot of different events. But I think it's going to be someone with longer legs who's good enough at the start to have a solid start, get up to top speed, and then the long legs takes over. With that being said, I often think that this is an interesting question. And Wallace, if you're okay, I'll bring this up now, because you guys both have an interest in basketball. I like to bring up this topic, which is people always say, okay, well, Bolt's advantage was his long legs, right? That's all it takes is being 6'5", and I do think that long legs are a big advantage for sprinting. But if that's the case, well, why wasn't Michael Jordan the fastest sprinter of all time? 6'6", probably long legs that are as long as Bolt. Could apply force really rapidly, right? Could get on and off the ground really rapidly. So it's not just that, I guess, is the second part of my answer, right? You got to have the ability, at the hip to kind of spin the wheels, right? Bolt was not just long legs and could apply force really fast. He also had this torque at the hip where he could have a pretty high frequency for a guy who is 6'5". So I think it's all of those things. The ability to have this torque at the hip, relatively longer legs is going to be the advantage, and then apply force at the ground. Have this kind of relatively stiff ground contact that's going to be key. So kind of going back to building off of Adam's answer, I think long legs relative to height, and then I think the ability to have some pretty good torque generating capability at the hip, and then the ability to apply force at the ground. That I think are going to be the key characteristics of the guy who runs a world record in 5 or 10 years or 20 years or whenever it happens.
And with that being said, I use specific examples in basketball. I'm going to tread a little lightly here. I'd like to keep my job and not be beat up by a lot of these sprinters. But I mean, you have Noah Lyles who's producing, world class numbers. He's super elite. Tobogo wins the Olympics in the 200 and then splits 43 flat in the 4x4, holding off, chasing down Rai Benjamin, barely winning. The range, he runs 9.8. So this range that we're seeing amongst the sprinters right now is something. It's not just running sub 10 and sub 20 and sub 45. I mean, these guys are pushing things to the max. What's going on right now? Can you explain any of this to our general listener?
Yeah, I mean, we're just seeing, athletes with incredible versatility across all four events. All three events, as you just said, from 1 to 2 to 4. Obviously, they have good enough acceleration. I'm stating the obvious. They have good enough acceleration to be fast in the 100. But, really, I think what goes underrated is how important top speed is to all three of those events: 100, 200, and 400. Clearly, it's a primary determinant of performance in the one, and then to a slightly lesser extent in the two. But you're not going to find somebody that can run a really good 400 without having really, really excellent top speed. And so I think the reason that we're seeing someone like a Tobogo, be able to, run well across all three events is just having, great top speed and being good enough in the start and good enough in the speed endurance realms to really carry it across all three events. And, obviously he's a foreign athlete. We're going to see American athletes, I know, that display that type of versatility as well, with similar physical characteristics. But yeah, it's been pretty impressive what some of these international athletes have done over the last year or so. So
If Vernon Norwood is watching this, I can only imagine he's smiling at your answer right now. So Lord help us, because he's gonna be walking around just talking just trash. But the last thing I want to talk about with this is we've seen a lot of 400 guys come down to the 100, and like you said, they have the frame, they have the dimensions, the physical characteristics. So, you know, is there a? Do you see a cap on a 400 runner coming down? Do you like the pure 100-meter runner like the Christian Colemans? Do you have a preference
I don't have a
personally?
preference. Yeah, I don't have a preference per se, and I don't want to hog the oxygen here, so I'll turn it back to Adam after this. But the only drawback I see potentially is where your training focus is, right? So I think if you're going with like a true short sprinter who's a 100, a 61 or a 61-2 person, maybe it means that they can really keep their training focused more purely on the short sprints, whereas someone who's maybe trying to be very versatile across all three. I don't know. Maybe it takes away from that a little bit potentially with the training, but no, I don't have a preference. We've seen elite times from many different builds and people who are truly short sprinters versus all the way to a Curly who's coming down from the 4 to the 1 and medals in world's competition. So obviously it's doable. I do think with those 4 coming down to 1, it's going to be potentially that body dimension and that kind of longer legs, really great top speed, and a start that's good enough, which is going to be the key there. But Adam, take it away with your perspective on this one.
Yeah, no, I think having range is really important. When we talk about team sport and team sport athletes, I think playing multiple sports. I mean, the literature is pretty clear that early specialization kind of particularly in sports like baseball, are not the best route. I'd kind of kick it back to you guys. Like, this versatility as far as like the 100, 200, 400. And you're seeing guys like Fred Curley, or you're seeing guys like Noah Lyles, kind of traverse all three. What do you think that's more of like a cultural shift in like training, or is that something that the athletes are just more robust? Where do you think that kind of lies?
I think Probably a little bit of both, maybe,
Yeah.
both a little bit of a shift in training, perhaps, as to what the goals are. I think, the era of sports science is such that, the treatment, the sports medicine, athletes have perhaps are more conscious of taking care of their bodies, that sort of thing. So it allows for them to, dedicate time to training it all through those events. But I think it's probably a combination. I don't know, Wallace, your input is valuable here as well, given your experience, but.
I'm a bit biased in this, so I'll say you watch Bolt, 200-meter runner. Fred Curley, honestly, in my opinion, can be a great 200-meter runner. I can go to Bogo and just name after name. I think in the right training program, so we'll highlight training, you can run a 4. And we start off our fall training like a 400-meter runner. You kind of dip down early season and mid-season to the 100. And like you said, it just depends on what you focus on. Me, it was primarily the 2. I hated the 4 just because I didn't like the hurt. If I could go back and do it again, maybe I probably would have took it a bit more serious. The 100 is the glory race. So you see guys trying to, go out and showcase their skill set there. To Adam's point earlier, it would be similar to basketball. You have to work on technique, and you have to have a certain skill set. I believe the 100 is a very technical race. There's a lot less room to make errors. So what you're seeing now is just people. I mean, they're succeeding. They're showcasing their talent level, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
fun to watch.
to your point, like shooting a basketball is a skill, hitting a baseball is a skill, but I mean, the block start in a 60 or 100 is absolutely a skill. So it's just like I guess some athletes possess that and some athletes don't. It was interesting. I remember Fred coming to our weight room in 2016. I think he was still at A&M, and he was like, "Hey, I'm Fred Curley, 400-meter specialist," And then 5 years later, I see him in the world championships winning the 100 meters. So that was kind of pretty cool to see his evolution over the years. Um,
Absolutely.
Here's a question: just two brilliant minds in speed power that I'm going to throw to the group. I don't want to get too far off topic. 958 or 1919, most likely to get broken first.
Dang, Dr. Clark, you're up.
I'll go with the 200. I'll go with the 200. I think only because we've seen a little bit closer to that than we have in the 100 recently. I think the 200 may be broken before the 100, but that's just guess, speculation. Yeah.
My answer is very controversial. I think it's going to depend on the shoes, but I won't go any further, and I ask that you don't either. Shout out to Nike, our sponsor. All right, I want you all to slum it. We're going to transition slightly. I want to slum it just a little bit. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of myths and just talk on social media about what could be and who could. So, Dr. Clark, for you, recently I saw ISO Speed race Noah Lyles
Right.
at his track, and he made this bold statement saying he's going to be an Olympian in 2028. Maybe not him or Jake Paul or whoever decides, what social media influencer athlete decides they want to come to our sport. What is the likeliness of any of that actually happening?
Yeah, none. No, here's the thing. So take an elite American like NFL wide receiver, right? So
Mhm.
I mean, some of the fastest guys in the league can run 10.6 seconds in 100 meters. Really.
DK Metcalf ran 10.3.
Agreed, and I'll get there in a second. But
Sorry.
no, you're good. You're good. I was working my way towards that point. But the majority of even the fastest guys in the league are roughly as fast or slightly faster than female 100-meter Olympians, right? I mean, who are running 10.7. So even if you take some of the best NFL guys, and yeah, like let's say they train for it, right? Maybe they'll run like 10.3, and it was phenomenal what DK did. But he's kind of the outlier and not the norm, even for elite NFL players, right? To go in there and run a 10.3, I was shocked at what he did. It was incredible, especially at his size. But the average guy on the street, even if they're very athletic, runs 10 meters a second, 10 and a half meters a second. I mean, that translates to like an 11 flat, an 11.5 100-meter dash. It's just not really going to be even in the right ballpark for, competing at an elite level. And so even with training, even if it's a guy who runs like a 4.6 40-yard dash, that may be like a reasonable time in the 100-meter dash. But again, so far removed from the realm of being competitive at truly like the national or international level. I just don't think it's realistic, for somebody like that. I thought that was phenomenal when Noah did that race. I mean, so entertaining, but I just don't think it's, realistic for, an average, pretty good athlete off the street to think that the Olympics are in their possibility. And I'm one of those guys, right? So no disrespect, but as Wallace said, if you want to be an Olympian, you got to choose your parents wisely. I mean, the genetic component of this is just so large. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's my that's my comment on it, and of course, that's no disrespect to any of those team sport athletes like an NFL wide receiver or whoever, the fastest players in EPL soccer. I mean, those athletes are incredible, but they're just not quite at that same linear speed level as a national or international level track and field sprinter.
And based off some of the athletes that you've seen, the numbers they produce, do you think a track and field athlete with spikes on an outdoor track could run sub 4 seconds in a 40-yard dash?
I don't. I think they could run four low. So, we saw, depending on the timing system, of course, this, that, and the other. We saw Kalen Walker run 4.15 on a turf field. He's obviously very, very fast, albeit not the fastest we have in the country. I think somebody could run, a really good starter like a Christian or somebody like that could run four low. I don't think sub four is going to happen. I don't know. Could be wrong. So it's
All
fun.
right.
We'll have to see it.
And Dr. Petway, for you, I want to ask, you've worked with basketball, you've worked with baseball, some football players as well. If you were going to take one of those athletes and to put them in a track and field event, where would you see the best transition? Where would you see someone excel the most? Would it be a basketball like in the jumps, or football like a lineman in the throws, or
Yeah,
what would you?
I think it would depend on the athlete, right? Obviously, um, one thing I'll say, and not to shift too far away from the original question, but in field sport and court sport, the ability to decelerate, like redistribute your center of mass and reaccelerate or change direction, is something that's vital, right? So we know in basketball, usually there's like a 2 to 1 or a 1.75 to 1 deceleration to acceleration ratio when you look at match play demands. So the ability to rapidly decelerate, redistribute your center of mass, and reaccelerate or change direction is really going to be a focus point on a lot of research we're doing here internally as it relates to team sport athletes. So, to give an example, playing basketball with Wallace Spearman, right? Uh, we would be in transition and he would outrun the ball and just run into the wall. Because you remember the baseline. So the basketball court's 94 feet, right? There was probably 10 feet between the wall and the baseline. And you would just keep running, right? So your ability to decelerate rapidly was non existent because it doesn't occur in your sport. So when you look at like transference of like a team sport athlete to athletics or track and field, it really depends, man. It's so skill dependent, and you know track and field athletes are so hyper aware of where their limbs are at in space relative to their competition that I typically, when I'm like coaching a track and field athlete, like even if it's in the weight room, they're like, okay, my pelvis was tilted, my right foot was out, my posture was bad. They'll give you feedback of very much internally of what's going on in their body, right? If you're with a team sport athlete, like a basketball player or football player, you say, how'd that feel? Oh, I don't know. Like, what was your ground contact in that? Felt fine.
They, they
So
don't know.
no, have no clue. But if you
I didn't
provide
know
in a
that.
context of a basketball player, hey, in this ball screen situation, what kind of level change do you feel? Oh, they'll be like, okay, I feel my shoulders going this way. I'm projecting this way. Hey, coming off a dribble handoff, what does it feel like for you? They'll have like they're a PhD in that, but just from a general standpoint and just upright running, acceleration, just overcoming inertia, like they're just very very poor at having that kind of awareness because they don't really need it relative to the context of their sport. So I would say, there may be some transference of like a really, you know, long, athletic, like power forward that may be able to compete in the high jump. But the technical skill relative to the high jump is so refined and so detailed that they just don't have that detail. So it's just a different skill. So, genetics is a huge component and you do have to choose your parents wisely. But like just because LeBron James is a freak athlete doesn't mean he's going to go out there and medal in the long jump or the high jump. It's just a different skill set and a different mentality, right? I do think I don't know, and this might be transference from team sport to track and field versus track and field to team sport. It just depends. I would say it might be easier for a team sport athlete to transfer to track and field, but it depends on the athlete, right? So it really it's such a refined skill set and something that you have to have such a great attention to detail to because when an athlete shoots a basketball, right, or hits a baseball, or comes off a dribble handoff or a ball screen situation, relative to the tactical demands of the game, there's such degrees of variance between how Kawhi does it versus Steph Curry versus Kyrie Irving versus Luka Doncic. There's just huge degrees of variance where you know in 100-meter sprint, like there's the variance very much decreases, right? So and it's so refined and it's so technical, it would really be hard for a team sport athlete. So even though DK ran a 10-3, like if he wanted to get like sub 10, like he would have to devote so much time and effort to every step, every rep, every block start, every acceleration that like a lot of team sport athletes just don't have that attention to detail relative to that skill set.
Did you want to comment on that, Dr. Clark, before I say
No,
something crazy?
no, well said. Yeah, no, it was great.
I would love to see Zach LaVine long jump. I would love to see Zion do. I have an Olympic high jumper, Olympic gold medalist high jumper sitting right
His
across from me in this room, so I need to
he
be careful what I say.
yeah,
He might have to
yeah.
lose some weight. Yeah, I get it. I
Body
get it.
mass. Yeah, I was gonna
Zion.
say body mass might need to decrease just a
Exactly.
bit on that one.
So I love to see, and Ja Morant. I would love to see them in some sort of jump in track and field, out of long,
maybe
high, triple.
maybe we should have a like an NBA track and field competition, like a multis. See what that
NBA,
looks
you hear
like.
that?
Yeah.
Come holler at us. We'll show you how it's really done. Well, thanks for joining us. This was awesome. I hope to have you all back again. I learned a lot. I did not know that basketball players and other athletes weren't aware of certain things that track and field athletes were. Made me feel a little bit good about myself. I appreciate that. So, hey, tune in next time. Appreciate you all. Peace.